when 6-year-old Emma Reyes dropped a small silver bracelet at the feet of a leather-vested stranger filling his motorcycle at a rest stop outside Albuquerque, and deliberately stepped on it 3 times while staring directly at him with eyes that screamed silent desperation. The man she'd chosen, a road-worn biker named Cole Briggs who'd spent 28 years as a search and rescue coordinator before retiring, recognized immediately that this wasn't clumsiness or a game. The engraving on that bracelet, visible even through the dust of the parking lot pavement, read Emma Rose Reyes in small, careful letters. And Cole had seen that exact name 2 days earlier on a missing child alert that had been circulating through his contacts from the Amber Alert system. A 6-year-old girl taken from a playground in El Paso, Texas, now 280 miles south. The woman standing 10 feet behind Emma, pretending to search through her purse while watching the child with predatory focus, had no idea she'd just lost the only advantage she had, the illusion that nobody was paying attention. The rest stop off Interstate 25, south of Albuquerque, was one of those forgettable places designed purely for function. A brick building housing restrooms and vending machines, a handful of parking spaces arranged in neat rows, a few picnic tables under metal awnings that provided minimal shade from the New Mexico sun. It was 2:47 in the afternoon on a Thursday in mid-September, the kind of clear autumn day where the sky stretched forever in shades of blue that tourists photographed obsessively. Cole Briggs had pulled in because his fuel light had been glowing for the past 15 miles, and he wasn't the kind of man who pushed his luck with empty tanks on desert highways. He was 56 years old, a member of the Desert Saints MC out of Santa Fe, a club known throughout New Mexico for running youth mentorship programs and organizing annual charity rides for children's hospitals. His vest bore patches that told the story of a life lived in service. Marine Corps deployment patches from 2 tours overseas, search and rescue coordinator certification from his years working with county emergency management, and the Desert Saints logo, a stylized motorcycle silhouette against a sunset, positioned over his heart. Cole had the build of someone who'd worked physically demanding jobs his entire adult life, shoulders broad from carrying equipment through rough terrain, arms corded with muscle and marked with scars from decades of outdoor work. His hair had gone mostly gray, cut military short, and his face showed the weathering that came from spending more time under open sky than under roofs. He moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste energy, who'd carried injured hikers down mountains and searched for lost children in conditions that would break softer men. Retirement hadn't softened him. If anything, it had given him more time to stay sharp, to ride, to remain ready for the moments when someone needed help, and seconds mattered. He was standing beside his Road King, fuel nozzle in hand, watching the numbers climb on the pump display, when he noticed the child. She was small for what he guessed was maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing a pink t-shirt with a cartoon character he didn't recognize, denim shorts that looked new, and white sneakers that were too clean for a kid who'd been traveling. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, secured with a purple scrunchie, and her face showed the kind of careful blankness that children learned when showing emotion became dangerous. She was walking slowly across the parking lot, maybe 20 feet from Cole's position, moving in the exaggerated, careful way kids sometimes did when they were trying not to draw attention while simultaneously trying to be noticed. Behind her, maintaining what looked like a casual distance but was really surveillance distance, was a woman in her late 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing sunglasses despite being under the metal awning, designer jeans and a white blouse that looked wrong for rest stop travel. She held her purse in front of her with both hands, and her body language radiated the kind of false casualness that Cole had learned to recognize during his years coordinating search operations. She was watching the girl with intensity that she thought she was hiding, the way a handler watches an asset, the way someone watches something they're afraid will run. The child's path brought her closer to Cole, and he saw her glance at him quickly, then away, then back again. Her eyes were brown and huge, and filled with something that made his chest tighten with recognition, fear, calculation, hope, the combination of emotions that appeared on the faces of people who were drowning and had just spotted someone who might be strong enough to pull them out. Cole had seen that look on lost hikers who'd been wandering the wilderness for days, on accident victims who'd been trapped for hours, on people who'd given up hope and then suddenly found a reason to try one more time. The girl was 3 feet from Cole when her hand went to her wrist, fingers fumbling with something small and silver, a bracelet. She pulled it off her wrist with deliberate movements, her eyes locked on Cole's face, and then she did something that sent ice through his veins. She dropped it. Not accidentally, not carelessly, but with clear intent, letting it fall directly in front of Cole's boots. It hit the pavement with a small metallic sound, and the girl immediately lifted her foot and stepped on it. Once, twice, 3 times, each step deliberate and hard, grinding the bracelet against the concrete while maintaining eye contact with Cole, her small face rigid with the effort of communicating something she couldn't say out loud. Cole's training kicked in before his conscious mind fully processed what he was seeing. He knelt down slowly, his eyes moving between the child's face and the bracelet on the ground, reading the situation the way he'd learned to read trail signs and weather patterns, and the 100 small indicators that told you when something was wrong. The bracelet was silver, thin, with small hearts engraved along its length, the kind of jewelry that parents bought for young daughters, meant to be treasured and kept safe. And there, engraved in small, careful script along one of the larger heart charms, was a name: Emma Rose Reyes. The name hit Cole like a physical blow. He'd seen it 2 days ago on a missing child alert that had come through his old contacts at the county emergency management office. 6-year-old Emma Rose Reyes, taken from a playground in El Paso, Texas, last seen wearing pink clothing, described as small for her age, with dark hair typically worn in a ponytail. The alert had included a photo, a school picture, showing a little girl with a bright smile and purple hair accessories. The alert had gone out to law enforcement, to search and rescue teams, to community watch groups throughout New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona, because El Paso sat at the junction of 3 states, and abductors used that geographic complexity to disappear quickly. Cole's eyes moved from the bracelet to the girl's face, and he saw confirmation in her expression. The way her small jaw was set with determination, the way her eyes were pleading with him to understand, the way she'd positioned herself so that the woman behind her couldn't see exactly what she'd dropped or how deliberately she'd done it. This child had been taught her name was important, had been told to remember it, had probably been instructed by parents to tell adults her full name if she was ever lost or in trouble. And now she was using the only tool she had, the only piece of proof that belonged to her, to tell a stranger that she needed help. Cole picked up the bracelet slowly, turning it over in his palm so he could read the engraving clearly, confirming what he already knew. Emma Rose Reyes. The letters were small but perfectly legible, the kind of engraving that cost extra because it required precision and care. He looked up at the girl and saw her nod once, barely perceptible, her eyes enormous and terrified and desperately hopeful. He saw her mouth move, forming words without sound, and he read her lips with the clarity that came from years of coordinating rescue operations in conditions where radios failed and hand signals became the only communication. "Help me. Please." The woman behind Emma had noticed that the child had stopped moving. Her posture shifted from casual observation to alert concern, and she started walking toward them with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement. Cole made a decision in the space of a heartbeat, the kind of decision that could either save a life or ruin his own if he was wrong, but he'd spent 28 years trusting his instincts about when people were in danger, and he wasn't about to stop now. He closed his hand around the bracelet, stood up to his full height of 6'2", positioned his body between Emma and the approaching woman, and pulled out his phone while maintaining eye contact with the woman whose expression was shifting. From false friendliness to calculation, to something that looked like panic. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying forced cheerfulness that didn't match her eyes, which were hard and watchful behind her sunglasses. "That's my daughter." She dropped her bracelet. "Thank you for picking it up. We need to get going. We have a schedule to keep." Cole didn't move. He kept his position between Emma and the woman, kept his phone visible in his hand, and said in the calm, authoritative voice he'd used for 3 decades when coordinating emergency responses, "What's your daughter's name?" It wasn't a question. It was a test. The woman's jaw tightened and she glanced at Emma, then back at Cole. Her smile became more strained. "Emma. Her name is Emma. We're traveling to visit family. Now if you'll excuse us." Cole's thumb moved across his phone screen, finding the contact he needed. What's her middle name? The woman's face went blank for half a second, the universal expression of someone who'd been asked a question they didn't know the answer to and hadn't expected to be asked. She recovered quickly, too quickly, the way people did when they were improvising lies. Marie. Her middle name is Marie. Emma Marie. Now please, we really need to go. Cole hit dial on his phone and spoke clearly enough for the woman to hear every word. This is Cole Briggs calling from the rest stop at mile marker 147 on Interstate 25 southbound. I need law enforcement here immediately. I have a possible child abduction in progress. The child matches the description of Emma Rose Reyes from the El Paso Amber Alert issued 2 days ago. I have her bracelet with her name engraved on it, and the adult female claiming to be her mother just gave me the wrong middle name. The woman's expression transformed. The false friendliness shattered, and underneath was something cold and calculating and dangerous. She took 2 quick steps backward, her hand going into her purse. Cole's military training assessed threat levels automatically. He moved Emma behind him with one hand while keeping his phone to his ear, positioning himself between the child and whatever the woman might be reaching for. The 911 dispatcher's voice came through the phone, professional and urgent, asking for his location, descriptions, license plate numbers if he had them. Cole provided details while watching the woman's face cycle through options, seeing her calculate distances, exits, probabilities. Emma's small hand gripped the back of Cole's vest, fingers digging into the leather with the desperate strength of a child who'd been told too many times to be quiet, to behave, to not cause problems, and had finally found someone who was willing to cause problems for her sake. Cole could feel her shaking, could feel the tremors running through her small body, and something in his chest cracked open at the realization of how much courage it had taken for this 6-year-old girl to drop that bracelet, to step on it 3 times to make sure he noticed, to trust that a stranger on a motorcycle might be safer than the woman who'd been controlling her for 2 days. The woman made her decision. She turned and ran. Not toward a vehicle, because she'd apparently assessed that she couldn't get to one, get it started, and get out before police arrived, but toward the perimeter of the rest stop where desert scrubland stretched toward the horizon. It was a desperate move, the choice of someone who knew they were caught and was trying to buy time or distance or any advantage they could grab. Cole didn't chase her. His priority was the child behind him, keeping her safe, keeping her calm, making sure she knew that help was here and she wasn't going back to that woman. He knelt down, turned to face Emma while keeping one eye on the running woman, and spoke in the gentle voice he'd used with his own daughters, the voice that said, "You're safe now. I've got you. It's going to be okay. Emma, I'm Cole. You were very brave to show me your bracelet. You did exactly the right thing. The police are coming, and they're going to help you get back to your mom and dad. You're safe now. You understand? You're safe." Emma's face crumpled and she started crying. Not the quiet, hidden crying of a child who'd been taught to stay silent, but the loud, overwhelming sobbing of someone who'd been holding it together for days and finally had permission to fall apart. She collapsed forward and Cole caught her, this small, shaking child who'd been brave enough to ask a stranger for help, who'd used the only tool she had to signal for rescue, who'd trusted her instincts when they told her that a weathered biker might be the safest person in that rest stop. Cole held her while she cried, while sirens began wailing in the distance, while other travelers at the rest stop started noticing the commotion and the woman running across the desert and the biker holding a sobbing child. The first New Mexico State Police unit arrived 4 minutes later, pulling into the rest stop with lights blazing and tires kicking up dust. 2 more units followed within seconds, boxing in the parking area while officers emerged with the controlled urgency that came from responding to child abduction calls. Cole stayed kneeling beside Emma, keeping himself between her and the activity, keeping his hands visible, keeping his voice calm and steady, while he explained to her that these were the helpers, the police officers who were going to make sure she got home safely. The running woman had made it maybe 200 yards into the scrubland before a state police officer with tracking experience had intercepted her, and Cole could see her being walked back toward the rest stop in handcuffs, her earlier calculation replaced by the blank resignation of someone who knew the game was over. A female sergeant approached Cole and Emma with the careful, deliberate movements of someone trained in child crisis response. She was in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of competent authority, and she knelt down at a respectful distance before speaking. Hi, Emma. My name is Sergeant Martinez. Your mom and dad have been looking for you for 2 days, and they're going to be so happy that you're safe. Can you come with me so we can get you checked out and call your parents?" Emma looked at Cole with uncertainty, this stranger who'd become her anchor in the past 10 minutes, and Cole nodded encouragement. "It's okay, Emma. Sergeant Martinez is going to take good care of you. I'll be right here if you need me." The little girl released her grip on Cole's vest slowly, transferring her trust to the sergeant with the reluctance of someone who'd learned that adults couldn't always be trusted, but was choosing to try again anyway. Sergeant Martinez led Emma toward an ambulance that had arrived for medical evaluation, while another officer approached Cole for his statement. The officer was young, maybe late 20s, with the earnest intensity of someone relatively new to the job who was processing the weight of what they'd just witnessed. "Sir, I'm Officer Reeves. Dispatch said you recognized the child from the Amber Alert and that she signaled you for help. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" Cole explained the sequence of events with the precision of someone who'd filed hundreds of incident reports during his search and rescue career. The deliberate bracelet drop, the 3 times Emma had stepped on it to ensure he noticed, the engraving that matched the missing child alert, the woman's inability to provide the correct middle name, the decision to call for help immediately. He handed over the bracelet, now sealed in a plastic evidence bag, and watched Officer Reeves handle it with the reverence of someone who understood they were holding the single piece of evidence that had saved a child's life. The investigation unfolded quickly once Emma was safe and the woman was in custody. The abductor was identified as Jennifer Hollis, a 42-year-old woman with a history of mental health crises and an obsession with having a daughter after losing custody of her own children years earlier. She'd been volunteering at after-school programs in El Paso, had befriended Emma's family, had learned enough about their routines to know when Emma would be at the playground, with her older brother as supervision. She'd approached Emma with a story about Emma's mother being in an accident and needing her immediately, had driven her across state lines into New Mexico, and had been heading toward Colorado when she'd stopped at the rest stop. Emma had tried to signal other adults during the 2 days she'd been missing, had tried to tell a gas station clerk and a restaurant server that something was wrong, but both times she'd been too scared to speak clearly, and the adults had dismissed her concerns as a child being fussy or dramatic. The bracelet had been her last resort, the one piece of proof she carried that couldn't be explained away or ignored. Cole sat at a picnic table giving his formal statement while paramedics evaluated Emma 20 feet away. He watched the little girl accept a stuffed bear from one of the officers, watched her nod at questions, watched her point at the bracelet in the evidence bag, and explain something that made Sergeant Martinez's expression tighten with what looked like a combination of sadness and fury. After 30 minutes, Martinez approached Cole with information that made his decision to trust his instincts feel like the most important choice he'd made in years. "Mr. Briggs, Emma told us that she dropped that bracelet for 6 different people before you. She tried at a gas station, at a fast food restaurant, at another rest stop. People stepped over it, kicked it aside, or picked it up and handed it back to her captor without question. You were the 7th person she tried, and you were the first person who paid attention, who looked at her face instead of just seeing a child, who trusted that something was wrong and acted immediately." The weight of that information settled into Cole's chest like a stone. 6 times this child had tried to ask for help. 6 times adults had been too busy, too distracted, too conditioned to mind their own business to notice a 6-year-old girl desperately trying to communicate that she'd been stolen. Cole thought about all the times during his search and rescue career when he'd arrived at scenes where someone had been missing for hours or days, when he'd interviewed witnesses who said they'd seen something unusual, but hadn't wanted to make a fuss, hadn't wanted to be wrong, hadn't wanted to look foolish. He thought about the lives that could have been saved if someone had been willing to look closer, to ask questions, to trust their instincts that something wasn't right. He looked at Emma sitting in the ambulance with her stuffed bear and felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came from knowing you'd been in the right place at the right moment and had made the choice that mattered. Emma's parents arrived 3 hours later, having driven from El Paso at speeds that probably should have earned them tickets, but that every officer on that highway chose to ignore. Cole was still at the rest stop, having been asked to remain for additional interviews, and because Emma had specifically requested that the man with the motorcycle stay until her parents arrived. When Maria and Carlos Reyes pulled into that rest stop and saw their daughter, the sound that came from Maria Reyes was something between a cry and a prayer, a release of 2 days of terror and helplessness and the kind of fear that parents feel when their children disappear. She ran across the pavement and dropped to her knees in front of Emma, gathering her daughter into her arms with a desperation that made every person watching have to look away or risk breaking down themselves. Carlos Reyes stood behind his wife and daughter with tears streaming down his face, one hand on Emma's head, the other on Maria's shoulder, holding his family together while they fell apart with relief. After long minutes of reunion, after Emma had been held and examined and held again, after the medical team had confirmed she was physically unharmed despite 2 days of psychological trauma, Sergeant Martinez brought the Reyes family over to where Cole waited. Maria Reyes looked at this weathered biker in his leather vest, and her face showed the kind of gratitude that went beyond words, the recognition of a debt that could never be repaid. Because how do you thank someone for giving you back your child? You're the man who saw her, who believed her when everyone else looked away, the man who called the police and kept her safe. Her voice broke, and she couldn't continue, overwhelmed by emotion too large for language. Cole stood and took off his Desert Saints vest, the one he'd worn for 12 years, the one that bore patches marking every significant moment of his adult life. He knelt down to Emma's level and held it out to her, this small girl who'd been brave enough to try 7 times to signal for help, who'd trusted her instincts that dropping her bracelet might communicate what her voice couldn't. Emma, this vest has patches that tell stories about helping people and never giving up and trusting that someone will answer when you ask for help. You keep this until you're big enough to wear it, because what you did today, being brave enough to ask for help 7 times even when it didn't work the first 6 times, that's the kind of courage that people spend their whole lives trying to learn. You already have it at 6 years old. Emma took the vest with small hands and held it against her chest. She looked up at Cole with those enormous brown eyes that had been so full of desperate hope 10 hours earlier and were now showing something different, something that looked like peace. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for looking at my bracelet. Thank you for seeing me when everybody else was too busy. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth, the recognition that being seen, truly seen and believed and taken seriously, was sometimes the difference between rescue and tragedy. Cole felt his throat close with emotion and could only nod, trusting that this little girl understood what he couldn't put into words, that her courage had reminded him why he'd spent 30 years of his life showing up in emergencies, why being the person who paid attention mattered more than comfort or convenience or the fear of being wrong. The Reyes family stayed in touch with Cole over the years that followed. They sent photos of Emma growing up, sent updates about her therapy and her healing, sent invitations to birthdays and school events and family gatherings. Emma kept Cole's vest in her room, displayed on a special hanger where she could see it every day, a reminder that asking for help worked if you kept trying, that strangers could become heroes if they chose to pay attention, that her voice and her instincts had value even when she was small and scared and everyone else was looking away. When Emma turned 10, the Reyes family drove to Santa Fe to attend a Desert Saints MC charity event, and Emma wore Cole's vest over her shoulders like a cape while she walked through the rows of motorcycles and talked to the bikers about the importance of noticing when children seem scared or out of place. She'd become a confident kid who spoke at schools about trusting your instincts and asking for help even when it was hard, who'd turned her trauma into advocacy, who understood at 10 years old what many adults never learned, that being willing to signal for help and being willing to see someone signaling were 2 sides of the same equation and both required courage. The Desert Saints MC created a program after Emma's rescue, teaching community members to recognize signs that children might be in distress. They distributed cards with indicators to watch for, behaviors that suggested someone was signaling for help, the importance of trusting instincts when something felt wrong even if you couldn't articulate exactly why. They ran workshops at schools and community centers, explaining that sometimes children couldn't speak up directly because they'd been threatened or were too scared, and that adults needed to be vigilant about unusual behaviors, mismatched stories, children who seemed disconnected from the adults they were with. Over 5 years, the program reached 12,000 people throughout New Mexico, and 3 times members of the community reported suspicious situations that led to interventions before children could be taken across state lines or disappeared into trafficking networks. Each time, someone paid attention. Each time, someone chose to look closer instead of assuming everything was fine. Each time, someone was willing to risk being wrong if it meant a child might be safe. Cole kept something from that rest stop, a photograph that Sergeant Martinez had taken after Emma was reunited with her parents, showing the little girl holding his vest while standing between her mother and father with the biggest smile on her face. The image wasn't particularly artistic, just a quick snapshot taken on a phone camera, but it captured something essential, the moment when a family that had been broken apart by violence and deception was made whole again, because one person had been paying attention. Cole had that photo mounted and hung in the Desert Saints clubhouse with a caption that Emma had written 2 years later during a visit. Sometimes you have to ask 7 times before someone listens. Thank you for being the 7th person. Thank you for listening. When Emma turned 16, she showed up at a Desert Saints community event wearing a t-shirt she'd designed herself. It showed a silver bracelet with a heart charm and the words, "If something feels wrong, try again. Someone is watching. Someone will help." She'd made 200 shirts and sold them all in 3 hours, donating the proceeds to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She stood at a booth talking to families about teaching children that persistence in asking for help was strength, not weakness, that being dismissed once or twice or 6 times didn't mean they should stop trying, that the 7th person might be the one who finally saw them and believed them and took action. Cole watched this confident teenager who'd been a terrified 6-year-old dropping a bracelet at a rest stop and felt something like pride mixed with humility, the recognition that he'd been part of a chain reaction that had transformed tragedy into purpose, that had taken a child's worst day and somehow helped her grow into someone who wanted to prevent other children from experiencing the same terror. If you believe in the power of paying attention in public spaces, of taking children's signals seriously even when they seem small or unclear, and if you believe that being willing to ask for help 7 times is just as important as being willing to stop and help on the 7th request, then this story matters. Because Emma Reyes and Cole Briggs proved that child abductions happen in ordinary places during ordinary moments, that predators count on bystanders being too busy or too uncomfortable to intervene, and that sometimes the difference between a child coming home and a child disappearing forever is one person who notices a bracelet on the ground and chooses to pick it up and read the name engraved on it. The story of Emma and the bracelet became part of Desert Saints' identity, a reminder that their role in the community wasn't just charity rides and fundraisers, but being present and aware and willing to act when vulnerable people needed someone to truly see them and take them seriously. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their attention might save a life. Tell us in the comments, have you ever noticed something that felt wrong and acted on it? Or have you taught the children in your life that asking for help 7 times is better than giving up after being ignored once? Your awareness matters because every person willing to pay attention becomes part of the safety net that brings children home.